This video will focus on your PDHP assessment task for Core Unit 1 Health Priorities in Australia. It's due week 6 so the date is June 3, 2013, and it is an essay and it's weighted at 15%, and you will need to submit it via Turnitin as usual, and it is limited by a word limit of 1200 words. So getting straight down to the question is analyse the health inequities experienced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, or ATSI peoples, and people in rural and remote areas, and it will be marked out of 15. Just looking quickly at breaking down this question. So analyse, what does it actually mean? So analyse means to identify components and the relationship between them and draw out and relate implications. So just really simply, what we're asking you to do is try to make relationships between concepts and tell us what happens as a result. So instead of just listing ideas and just providing a general overview, we really want you to think deeply, connect things together, and tell us what happens as a result. That's what takes you up into that really high band and will get you a great mark. So there's a little sample paragraph here for the Socio-Cultural Determinants for ATSI peoples, which is one of the areas that you need to look into. And you can see here that the person has written a paragraph here about how discrimination over the years has led ATSI people to feel as though they have no control over their health. So if people are discriminated against, then they don't feel very valued, and so this affects their self-esteem and affects their capacity to control their own health. And so this could lead to substance abuse and mental health issues, and then obviously risky behaviours such as smoking, drinking, etc. And again, this leads to high rates of CVD and cancer as a result of using these substances to cope. So let's just break this paragraph up a little bit and take a look at what's going on. You can see that I'm just breaking it up into sections. So this first sentence here really is the identify components part and make relationships. So the component here is the discrimination. The systemic discrimination just means ongoing discrimination over time. So that's a component, and you can see that the relationship has been made between discrimination and ATSI peoples. So there's the relationship, and also they've made a relationship to a perceived lack of control, or this has led to a perceived lack of control over their health. So you can see there we've got component, and component, and there's a relationship there between them. So that's the kind of thing that we want you to do. And then where it says here draw out and relate implications, you can see here if you use specific language, you can actually help the reader to identify your implications. You can see by saying this has led to, or moreover this has resulted in, or these behaviours have made a significant contribution to. You can see that that's another way of getting to the implications. So this has led to increased rates of helplessness, low self-esteem, mental health issues, and lack of connection to their own culture. So that's an implication. And then you can see here where it says draw out and relate implications. So you can see that the person has actually gone on, used this word moreover to indicate that they're still going, and drawing out another implication. And this implication relates to this implication, because if someone has low self-esteem and they feel helpless and they've got mental health issues, they may then, or this may result in, increased use of substances such as smoking, drinking, illicit drug use. So you can see there's a relationship between the two implications, which you need to do here. But there's also another implication, which says that if you do these risky things, it will lead to CVD cancer. So you can see that there's a relationship between this implication and also this implication. So not only has this person drawn out implications, they've actually related the implications as well. And the implications link back to these components. So that's analysis. And so that's what we really want you to be able to do. So moving on, you can see that there are 3 sections that you need to focus on in the task: the nature and the extent of health inequities, socio-cultural, socio-economic, environmental determinants, the roles of individuals, communities, and governments in addressing the health inequities. So the first part is the nature and the extent of health inequities. You can see if I click on the task here where it says resources, I'm going to link the screencast into here when I'm done. And there's a little scaffold here. It's not really little, it's actually quite detailed, that details the question and provides a bit of an overview of what you can do in each section. So an introduction should be quite brief, just really restating or rephrasing the question and telling us what you're going to be including in your essay. And then moving straight to the nature and the extent of inequity, just to make it really clear. The nature of inequity just means, what are the areas of inequity? What are the specific areas that are different between this group, ATSI, rural and remote, and the rest of the population? So we know for ATSI already that they have lower life expectancy, higher rates of mortality, higher infant mortality rates, higher levels of morbidity, prevalence and incidence of particular diseases. So these are the areas that are different. So that's the nature of the inequity. The nature of inequity is all about what are the areas, or what is the inequity. You can go into a lot more depth. You can see that paragraph provides more detail, and we want you to go into some more depth. So please read that carefully. So the extent of inequity is how severe, or what is the level of the inequity. So this is about providing some statistics or data to tell us how serious or how bad the inequity is. So for example, if you're talking about life expectancy for the nature of inequity, for the extent of inequity, you need to tell us what is the life expectancy gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So you can see how there's a relationship between the nature and the extent. So in saying that, the best way to write this is to blend it together. So this paragraph here will tell you a little bit about life expectancy and how it's an issue for ATSI people. That's the nature of inequity. And then it moves on to tell us a bit about what the actual difference is between life expectancy of Indigenous males and females. So there's a 10.6 year gap between Indigenous males and non-Indigenous males, and a 9.5 year gap between Indigenous females and non-Indigenous females. So by doing this, you're telling us life expectancy is an area of inequity. It's an area of major difference between non-Indigenous and Indigenous. And here you're telling us how serious it is, or the extent that there is a large gap. So that's what we want you to do there. So it shouldn't really be a big part, even though there's a lot written here, but it's just, you just need to tell us what the inequity is and then provide some stats to tell us how serious or how bad it is or what the level is. Moving on to the next part, which is the determinants of health, you've got to focus on the socio-cultural, the socio-economic, and the environmental determinants. Now, I want you to have a really good read of this, because it provides a paragraph that's been written by another student, and it's really good because it includes really good language and it shows the implications and it makes good relationships. So if you want to know how to write really well, read those paragraphs because it does it really well. Now, if you're wondering what the socio-cultural determinants are, I've linked into your syllabus. I'll just show you what they are. Into your syllabus, which looks like this. You can see all these crazy links in there that we've linked in some documents for you, which provide an overview of the groups that you need to focus on for the assignment. So, for example, there's some information about the nature of inequity, the extent of inequity, socio-cultural determinants. So you can see I've got history of discrimination in there for ATSI groups, which I've already discussed, domestic violence, socio-economic determinants, lower income, jobs, more likely to be manual labour, unemployment, etc., education levels, environmental determinants, all about access to services, lower access to healthcare, infrastructure, etc. And then we've got the role of the individual communities and governments in addressing the inequity. So what does the individual do to improve the inequity or to make things a little bit more fair or equal? What does the government do? So that's a good overview, and there's also one for there's also one for people in rural and remote communities. Now this provides you an overview. I mean, these are, it's not the answer. You need to read this and think, well, how can I link these up, make relationships between them, and then draw out the implications. So there's a lot of links to be made in here. You don't have to talk about all of it. You've only got 1,200 words, but you need to pick the ones that are most important. For example, if we're talking about ATSI people, I would definitely be talking about life expectancy and mortality. And you would talk about some of the diseases that are higher in Indigenous communities than non-Indigenous. And so you want to be able to make some relationships between, okay, what sociocultural determinants are leading to all of these issues and these statistics, how are the socioeconomic determinants leading to these issues, etc. So going back to the task, you can see the dot points are pretty clear there. The roles of individuals, communities and governments, you really need to identify what do individuals do to help to reduce the inequity. And if you go in and check out this scaffold again, you can see past all the information about determinants, there's also information here about the role of individuals. There's a little section there. What do individuals do? Individuals participate, they become empowered, they empower other people in their families, and so if they're able to empower others, then that's going to have an impact on smoking rates, for example. And you can see that I've linked in some campaigns that are designed to empower Indigenous people. This is a new Indigenous anti-smoking campaign. I quit for my family. You can see that he's quitting because he values the health of his family, doesn't want his children to start smoking as he has done. So you can see that the power of the individual in creating or reducing the inequity. We've also got communities. What do communities do? And there's a link in here to the Good Sports program, which is a program that is across the entire country, really, urban, rural. But it's a really powerful program that can help people in rural communities get educated about alcohol, which is a real issue in rural communities. The sport environment is a healthy environment that actually promotes a safe drinking culture. And so through this, it empowers sports clubs, which are communities, and the communities actually empower their individuals, which leads to reduced substance use, which then has flow-on effects. So you've got to keep drawing out implications throughout for this as well. And then you've got the Close the Gap policy, which is a really important one, which I would expect people to be making reference to in their assessment. What is Close the Gap? It's the Australian government's plan for reducing the health inequity for Indigenous communities. It's focused on all of those measures: life expectancy, infant mortality, education, Year 12 attainment, etc. And the government coordinates this. It works with local and state governments. It works with community groups to try and encourage better health for Indigenous communities. And so this also has flow-on effects as well, which you'll have to do some research about, but there's a paragraph in there that explains a little bit about how Close the Gap works with NGOs and community organisations and promotes the importance of vaccination in Indigenous and rural communities. So this plays a role in reduced infant mortality. So you can see that making relationships between Close the Gap, what it does in terms of the measures that it focuses on, and then how governments liaise, which is a really important word. Liaise just means that they work with. So they liaise with all these other sectors with health promotion, and this leads to reduced infant mortality and so on. So please read this closely, have a good look at it. Your conclusion should be quite brief as well. Don't spend too much time on the conclusion, just sum up with some key points. Try and keep to the word limit. It's important that you read your criteria. Of course, you're expected to analyse to get into the top band. It's critical thinking and analysis. We'd like you to see you make lots of connections between concepts and draw out implications, examples and evidence throughout. So use statistics and evidence to communicate. Make sure it's logical and cohesive. And this word here is a big one, succinct. If you write too much, you can't get up into that band. So you need to be fairly close to that word limit. So please get it in on time. And if you've got questions, please speak to your teachers. Thank you very much for listening.